If you're an NBA fan or hell, even an NBA front office executive, and I told you that in the offseason your team was going to trade away Omer Asik for basically nothing, was going to trade away Jeremy Lin for practically nothing, was going to lose out on both Carmelo Anthony and Chris Bosh in free agency, was going to let Chandler Parsons leave as a restricted free agent to your in-state rivals, the Dallas Mavericks, and get nothing in return, and all the while go back to the Trevor Ariza well where you've been once before and then traded him away and give him 4 years and $32 million, you'd probably have to agree that you didn't have a great offseason, right? Right? Of course you would think that would be a shitty offseason for your team. Unfortunately for the Houston Rockets and Houston Rockets fans, there's one person who doesn't think that's the case. There's one person that's been the architect and the mastermind of this borderline disastrous offseason for the organization. And that is, of course, Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey, who took to Sports Radio 610 in Houston and said some interesting things. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but a couple of things that really stood out. He said it takes at least three elite players with very little exception throughout history in order to win an NBA championship. He sat there and said that once Bosh decided to not come in, he was left with a very difficult decision of whether or not to match the offer sheet that Parsons had signed with the Dallas Mavericks. But if Bosh had signed, he would have no doubts about it or qualms about it. He would have re-signed Chandler Parsons, which seemed very odd to me. Then he went on to say that while he liked Chandler Parsons and thought he was a really, really good player, and he thinks that a threesome of Dwight Howard and James Harden and Chandler Parsons can win an NBA championship, he thinks that what he's done with a Harden and a Howard and draft picks and cap room and mid-level exceptions makes him more likely to be able to construct an NBA championship team in Houston. And he thinks that they are in a better position as an organization now than if they would have matched Chandler Parsons' offer sheet with the Mavericks. What in the fuck is Daryl Morey smoking? Let's start off first with this ridiculous assertion by general manager Daryl Morey that teams need to have at least 3 elite players in order to win an NBA championship, and there's very little exception throughout history. Well, actually, Daryl Morey, you moron, recent history would suggest that you're dead fucking wrong. In fact, 11 of the past 16 NBA champions had 2 or fewer elite players. 11 out of the past 16. The 99 Spurs, the Kobe Shaq Lakers, the 03 Spurs, the 04 Pistons, the 06 Heat, the Kobe and Paul Gasol-led Lakers of 9 and 10. The 2011 Dallas Mavericks, and hell, the team that just won the NBA championship this season, the San Antonio Spurs. In no way, shape, or form can you form a legitimate, logical argument to me that those teams at those times had 3 or more elite players, yet 11 of them ended up winning NBA championships. So what history are you basing this off of? Hell, when the Rockets won their back-to-back championships in 94 and 95, Hakeem Olajuwon was the only truly elite player. Don't throw in Clyde, because he was a shell of his former self as a part of that second championship team. It was a team constructed with role players. The Bulls that won their first 3 championships, 91, 92, 93. You had Jordan, you had Pippen. Grant was a good player, but he certainly wasn't elite. The Bad Boys Pistons teams of 88, 9, and 90. Isaiah Thomas was the only elite player on there. So what fucking history is Daryl Morey talking about that suggests that you must have at least 3 elite players in order to win an NBA championship? I also want to tackle something else Daryl Morey said that really concerns me. He sat there and said that a threesome of Howard, Harden, and Parsons could win an NBA championship. Well, if that was the case, and that's the whole name of the game, and that is your whole goal, is to position the Houston Rockets to someday win an NBA championship, why in the bluest of blue fucks would you not have kept Chandler Parsons when you just said yourself that that threesome could be the threesome that lead your organization to an NBA championship? But yet you were going to sit there and say that you love the flexibility that you have by not keeping a Chandler Parsons, and you think that makes you even more likely to win an NBA championship. But then if you would have signed Chris Bosh in free agency, then you would have matched Chandler Parsons, really hamstringing your organization from a financial standpoint from years to come. What the fuck planet is Daryl Morey living on? I legitimately feel bad for Houston Rockets fans, and I legitimately feel bad for players like Dwight Howard and James Harden with an incompetent, idiotic nincompoop like Daryl Morey running the freaking show in Houston. This guy makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. He sits there and believes that you need at least 3 elite players to win an NBA championship, even though recent NBA history clearly suggests otherwise. He believes that a threesome of Howard, Harden, and Parsons could win an NBA championship, but he doesn't think that was right for the Rockets. But if they would have signed Bosh in free agency, they would have had no qualms about matching Chandler Parsons, even though that would have cost them any remaining financial flexibility they could have possibly had, which seems to be what Daryl Morey is citing about why his moves this offseason were genius, and they set them up to be big-time winners to come, and they will be able to find those pieces that will make them an NBA championship team. Well, here's one problem with your philosophy, Daryl Morey. You're an idiot. You lost out on Carmelo in free agency. You lost out on Chris Bosh in free agency. You clearly butchered and botched the way that you handled this whole situation with freaking Chandler Parsons. Yes, you got Dwight Howard in free agency before last season. Yes, you were able to keep James Harden, even though you had to trade for him to begin with. What makes you think that a third big-time star would even want to come play for you at this point? And even if that was the case, what makes you think that if you did bring in that third star, that you would be any closer realistically to being an NBA championship contending team? You're talking about a Houston Rockets team that with Howard and Harden and Parsons was still eliminated in the first round of the playoffs by the freaking Portland Trailblazers. What planet is Daryl Morey living on? What ganja is this fuckstick smoking? Oh my God. You talk about an idiot, and you talk about the biggest losers of the NBA offseason so far. It clearly has to be the Houston Rockets. You let Chandler Parsons go for nothing. You replace him with Trevor Ariza, an older player, sure at a cheaper cost, but in my opinion, a lesser player who tends to only play well in contract years. You sit there and trade away Omer Asik for basically nothing. You trade away Jeremy Lin for practically nothing, and you lose out on both Carmelo and Bosh in free agency. Yet Daryl Morey thinks his team is perfectly poised and positioned to win an NBA championship in the future.